Dr. Melissa Hayes yanked the recording equipment from her car, hands trembling as she raced to capture the acoustic anomaly. The college marching band had unknowingly driven back an alien scout ship with their halftime practice routine. A statistical impossibility unless her theories were correct. "This changes everything," she muttered, calibrating her specialized microphone array, while curious students gathered at a safe distance. The Vibrational vessel had retreated almost reluctantly, vibrating at frequencies that made nearby windows hum. Her phone buzzed. General Warren Campbell, the same man who had shut down her research program and called her work dangerous pseudoscience before a military review board 3 years ago. "Hayes," she answered coldly. "Doctor," Campbell's voice was strained. "I assume you've seen them." "Seen them?" "One just fled from the Northwestern University marching band, General." She couldn't keep the vindication from her voice. "Exactly as my harmonic disruption theory predicted." Silence filled the line before Campbell cleared his throat. "The Joint Chiefs are convening an emergency session. We need you in Colorado now." So I'm not a reckless liability anymore. The bitter memory of her colleagues' deaths still haunted her. 3 brilliant scientists reduced to puddles of organic matter when a harmonic resonance test exceeded predicted parameters. Melissa. Campbell's use of her first name caught her attention. Chicago is gone. 7 million people. The vibrations, they just liquefied. Her knees buckled. 7 million people. She steadied herself against her car, the weight of Campbell's words threatening to crush her. "A military transport is already en route to your location. We need your research. All of it." The line went dead as a distant rumble drew her gaze skyward. 3 obsidian vessels, geometrically perfect tetrahedrons that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, moved with impossible precision toward downtown. Unlike conventional aircraft that pushed against air, these ships seemed to manipulate the very fabric of space around them, creating eerie harmonic distortions that made her teeth ache. Behind her, the band director shouted instructions, preparing for another practice run. "No." Melissa sprinted toward the band. "Everyone needs to evacuate. Now." The first notes of the brass section blared just as the lead Vibrational ship adjusted its course toward them. Melissa's acoustic equipment registered the shift immediately. The aliens weren't retreating this time. They were investigating. "Keep playing," she shouted, contradicting herself, scientific curiosity overriding fear. Her recording equipment captured everything. The musical notes, the alien ship's vibrational response, the complex harmonic interaction between them. The trombones hit a particularly resonant chord, and the alien vessel shuddered visibly, emitting a crystalline tone that made several students drop their instruments to cover their ears. The ship retreated to rejoin its companions, but not before releasing a small probe that descended toward the now scattered band. Melissa's scanner analyzed the probe's vibration patterns, not weapons, but recording equipment. The aliens were gathering data on human music. Military helicopters appeared on the horizon as Melissa downloaded the acoustic interaction data to her secure server. Whatever these creatures were, they responded to music in ways that defied conventional understanding. Their attack patterns followed mathematical progressions too precise to be random, yet they retreated from seemingly random harmonies produced by human musicians. As the military transport landed nearby, Melissa packed her equipment with renewed purpose. Her disgraced research wasn't just relevant anymore. It might be humanity's only hope. The Vibrations had declared war using sound itself as a weapon, not realizing they had attacked the one species in the galaxy it had spent millennia turning sound into art. The irony wasn't lost on her. Music, humanity's oldest form of expression, might be their newest, and only, effective weapon. Melissa's makeshift laboratory inside the Cheyenne Mountain complex hummed with activity as her hastily assembled team worked around the clock. The underground facility, once considered obsolete, now served as one of humanity's last secure research centers. "Play it again," she instructed Jackson Reed, who sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by audio equipment, salvaged from a decimated recording studio in Denver. Jackson nodded, his fingers dancing across the mixer board with practiced precision. The young sound designer hadn't spoken a complete sentence since arriving, but his ability to isolate and identify acoustic patterns was unmatched. He closed his eyes as the recording of the Northwestern Marching Band encounter played through specialized speakers. "There," he said suddenly, stopping the playback. 3.8 seconds in. "They're answering." Dr. Tyrone Washington leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "That's not just interference. It's a response pattern," Jackson insisted, rewinding the segment. "Listen to the low-frequency undertones." Maria Gonzalez, who had arrived still wearing her combat gear from an evacuation mission, narrowed her eyes. "Sounds like whale songs, but mathematical." Melissa nodded, recalibrating her acoustic spectrograph. "Jackson's right. The ship isn't just reacting to the music, it's responding to it." The doors slid open as General Campbell entered, his uniform rumpled from days without rest. The Situation Room monitors behind him showed red spreading across global maps. Territories lost, communications severed. "Please tell me you have something," he said, the military formality stripped from his voice. Melissa projected the acoustic comparison onto the main screen. "We've isolated a pattern in the Vraxian communications. They're using a quantum vibrational language that operates on perfect mathematical ratios." "And this helps us how?" Campbell asked. Maria stepped forward, pulling up footage from the New Mexico engagement, where an entire Vraxian landing force had decimated a military base. "Sir, look at their movement patterns during the attack. They advance in perfect synchronization until..." She pointed at a timestamp where the aliens suddenly scattered. "What happened there?" Campbell leaned closer. "The base's emergency sirens activated," Maria explained. "Standard warning pattern, but the harmonics disrupted their formation momentarily." Tyrone brought up his quantum models. "I believe their entire neural network operates on vibrational harmony. When we introduce chaotic elements, like human music with its emotional components and deliberate imperfections, it creates cognitive dissonance in their systems." "So we found their weakness," Campbell concluded. "Not exactly," Melissa cautioned. "They adapt quickly. The siren disruption only worked for 12 seconds before they adjusted. But," she pulled up her latest data, "each time we introduce complex human music, they take longer to adapt. The more emotional and unpredictable the composition, the more effective it is." Jackson, who had remained silent, suddenly played a complex jazz improvisation on a keyboard connected to his equipment. The resonance patterns on Melissa's monitors spiked dramatically. Improvisation, Melissa realized. That's the key. They can adapt to fixed patterns, but true human creativity, music created in the moment, that's impossible for them to predict or counter. "So our weapon is jazz?" Campbell asked incredulously. "Our weapon is human emotion expressed through sound," Melissa corrected. "The one thing their perfect mathematical minds can't comprehend." The facility shook as distant explosions rattled the mountain. The Vraxians had found them. "We're out of time," Campbell said. "What do you need to weaponize this theory?" Melissa exchanged glances with her team. "Musicians, real ones, and every speaker, amplifier, and sound system you can salvage. We're going to turn human art into the deadliest weapon Earth has ever deployed." As if on cue, the facility's lights flickered, and a low, haunting tone began to resonate through the mountain's core. The Vraxians weren't just attacking. They were communicating. "They know what we're doing," Jackson whispered, his perfect pitch identifying the complex message hidden in the vibrations. "They're curious." The abandoned recording studio in Nashville had survived the initial Vraxian assault only because it was forgotten, a relic from the golden age of country music, tucked between newer buildings that had been reduced to rubble. Its acoustic dampening and specialized equipment made it the perfect hideout for Melissa's team after the Cheyenne Mountain facility fell. "They're coming up 8th Avenue," Maria reported, her military training evident as she maintained watch at the boarded window. Outside, the distinctive hum of Vraxian ground troops grew louder, a perfect harmonic progression that made human bones resonate painfully. Melissa nodded grimly, continuing her adjustments to what she dubbed the resonance cannon, a modified concert speaker system connected to a network of amplifiers and tone generators. The prototype looked like a mad scientist's pipe organ, with cables snaking everywhere. "Tyrone, how's the harmonic mapping coming?" she asked. The physicist gestured to his equations scrawled across the studio's glass divider. "I've isolated 7 key frequency ranges that appear to disrupt their neural pathways, but something's missing." He tapped his pencil rhythmically against the glass. "The mathematical models predict a 22% disruption rate, but that's not enough to stop them." Jackson sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, fingers moving as if playing phantom piano keys. He hadn't spoken since they'd fled Colorado, but his body swayed slightly to a rhythm only he could hear. "We're overthinking this," Maria said suddenly, setting down her rifle. "Listen." Outside, the Vraxian patrol had paused. Through the walls came a faint sound. A street musician who hadn't evacuated was playing a blues riff on an old guitar several blocks away. The alien's harmonic hum faltered briefly. Jackson's eyes snapped open. His hands reached for the nearest keyboard, and he began playing. Not a calculated frequency pattern, but an improvised blues progression that mimicked and then expanded upon the street musician's melody. Melissa watched in amazement as the monitor readings spiked. "Of course," she whispered. "It's not just the frequencies, it's the emotional component." She rushed to her calculations, crossing out equations and scribbling new ones. "We've been approaching this like scientists, trying to create the perfect counter-frequency. But that's exactly what they expect. Mathematical precision." Tyrone's eyes widened with understanding. "They're beings of perfect order, so we need to introduce chaos," Maria finished. "Beautiful, emotional chaos." The Vraxian patrol outside moved closer to the building, drawn by Jackson's playing. Through the surveillance cameras, they could see the aliens tilting their crystalline sensory organs, almost like humans straining to hear a distant melody. "Jackson, keep playing," Melissa instructed, frantically reconfiguring the resonance cannon. "We don't need calculated disruption patterns. We need raw human emotion amplified through these frequencies." She turned to Maria and Tyrone. "Every culture on Earth has music that expresses joy, sorrow, love, grief, emotions the Vraxians have no concept for. That's why they're both disrupted by and drawn to our music. It's introducing concepts their perfectly ordered minds can't process." The building shook as the Vraxian patrol began using their vibrational weapons to clear a path to the entrance. They had minutes at most. "We're not ready for a full test," Tyrone warned, eyeing the hastily assembled equipment. Melissa connected the final wires to the keyboard where Jackson continued playing, lost in his improvisation. "We don't have a choice. If we're wrong, we die here. If we're right." She didn't finish the sentence as she activated the system. Jackson's blues melody, amplified and modulated through her harmonic algorithms, blasted through the building at extraordinary volume. Outside, the Vraxian troops froze. Their exoskeletons vibrated visibly, crystalline components resonating with the music. One by one, they began to emit discordant tones, not attack patterns, but attempts to mimic the bluesy notes. "It's working," Maria whispered. But their victory was short-lived. The lead Vraxian adjusted its vibrational field, stabilizing against the assault, and resumed its advance with a counter-harmony that made the humans' teeth ache. "They're adapting," Melissa realized, heart sinking. Unexpectedly, Jackson switched from blues to a frenetic jazz improvisation, fingers flying across the keys. The sudden change in emotional tone caught the aliens off guard again, buying precious seconds. "That's it," Melissa exclaimed. "Keep changing styles, emotions, cultural references. Don't let them adapt to any single pattern. The ruins of New Orleans' French Quarter served as humanity's unlikely last stand. Crumbling buildings and water-damaged streets created an acoustic labyrinth that somehow felt appropriate for what Melissa had come to think of as the world's most desperate concert. "This is insanity," Colonel Fletcher said, watching as military personnel positioned massive speaker arrays where street performers once entertained tourists. "Betting thousands of lives on a jazz band." "Not just any jazz band," Melissa corrected, adjusting the final connections to her modified amplification system. "The Preservation Hall survivors, musicians whose improvisational abilities border on supernatural." The 5 elderly musicians who had refused to evacuate their historic venue now sat in a semicircle, instruments at the ready. Their bandleader, Harold Washington, a 70-year-old saxophonist with gnarled hands and unflinching eyes, nodded toward the eastern perimeter where Vraxian scouts had been spotted. "Music saved this city after Hurricane Katrina," he said simply. "It'll save it again." Melissa checked the readings on her equipment. The resonance cannon had been rebuilt to her specifications, but this version incorporated something the original lacked: human performers feeding directly into the system. "Their advance units will reach us in approximately 12 minutes, Maria reported, returning from her reconnaissance circuit. "Standard attack formation, harmonic disruptors in front, followed by extraction units." Jackson, who had become their impromptu musical translator, stood with his eyes closed, listening to the distant Vraxian approach. "They're using a new frequency pattern," he murmured, "more complex than before. They've been studying our music." The refugee camp behind them held over 15,000 civilians who couldn't be evacuated in time. Their last hope was Melissa's theory that a live jazz performance, amplified through her modified system, could disrupt the Vraxian assault long enough for additional transports to arrive. "General Campbell is 2 hours out with reinforcements," Colonel Fletcher updated them. "We need to hold until then." The distance between insanity and inspiration, Melissa had learned, was often just a matter of perspective. "Mr. Washington," she addressed the bandleader, "play whatever feels right in the moment. The more emotional, the better. We'll handle the amplification and modulation." Tyrone monitored the complex array of equipment. "The system is stable, but we're drawing enormous power. Once we start, we'll have maybe 20 minutes before the generators fail." The first Vraxian scouts appeared at the edge of the quarter, their crystalline bodies glinting in the sunset. Unlike the mechanical movement of conventional troops, they flowed like liquid mercury, each step perfectly synchronized to harmonic vibrations that made windows shatter and pavement crack. "Now," Melissa ordered. Harold Washington lifted his saxophone and began to play, not the prepared piece they had rehearsed, but a mournful, soulful improvisation that spoke of loss, resilience, and defiance. The other musicians joined in, creating a tapestry of sound that Melissa's system captured, amplified, and projected toward the advancing aliens. The effect was immediate. The front line of Vraxians halted, their crystalline forms vibrating in visible distress. Some began emitting counterharmonics, attempting to stabilize their formations, but the unpredictable nature of jazz improvisation made it impossible to anticipate the next note or emotional shift. "It's working," Tyrone confirmed, monitoring the readings. "Their harmonic fields are destabilizing." But what happened next surprised even Melissa. As the band shifted into a more upbeat, joyful progression, several Vraxians began moving in patterns that mimicked the rhythm. Not fighting against it, but almost dancing with it. "They're responding to it," Maria whispered. Jackson nodded, eyes still closed. "Not just disruption. They're trying to understand." The lead Vraxian scout advanced slowly toward the band, its usual attack posture absent. Instead, it extended sensory appendages toward the music, absorbing the vibrations directly. "Don't stop playing," Melissa instructed the band. "Whatever happens, keep playing." As the music swelled, a previously unobserved phenomenon occurred. The Vraxian began to glow from within, pulsing in rhythm with the bassist's heartfelt solo. not with destructive energy, but with what appeared to be resonant appreciation. The converted concert hall in Tokyo hummed with activity as engineers and musicians worked side by side, transforming traditional instruments into weapons. The New Orleans breakthrough had spread worldwide, igniting a resistance movement unlike anything in human history. Melissa stood on the conductor's platform, watching as a master taiko drummer demonstrated rhythms to a team of soldiers. The massive drums, once used in religious ceremonies, now served as low-frequency disruptors capable of scrambling Braxian navigation systems. The Beijing Philharmonic successfully repelled an attack this morning, General Campbell reported, approaching with a tablet displaying footage of orchestral performers in combat gear. Their string section modified to emit precise counter frequencies, 86% effectiveness. And casualties? Melissa asked, already knowing the answer would be too high. 17 musicians lost when the Vraxians adapted to their pattern. Campbell's face hardened, but they held long enough for evacuation. Jackson appeared at her side, his notepad filled with transcriptions of Vraxian harmonic responses. In the weeks since New Orleans, he had become their leading expert on alien communication patterns. "They're learning from each encounter," he said quietly, "not just adapting to neutralize our music, but absorbing elements of it. Listen." He played a recording captured from a disabled Vraxian scout. The crystalline tones contained unmistakable echoes of human musical structures, jazz improvisations blended with classical motifs and indigenous rhythms. "It's like they're creating their own music," Melissa realized, "mimicking our emotional expressions without understanding the emotions themselves." Maria entered, fresh from training with a West African drum circle whose polyrhythms had proven especially effective at disrupting Braxian communication networks. "The orbital defense stations report increased activity," she said. "Their mothership is repositioning. They're preparing for something big." Tyrone looked up from his workstation, where quantum equations filled multiple screens. "If they've been studying our harmonic weapons, they'll develop countermeasures eventually. We need to escalate before they do." Melissa nodded, turning to the global map that dominated the wall. Colored pins marked successful musical defense points: New Orleans Jazz, Tokyo Taiko, Beijing Orchestral, Mumbai Sitar Ensembles, Senegalese drum circles, Brazilian samba schools, indigenous Australian didgeridoo outposts. "Every culture on Earth has contributed to our defense," she said. "But we're fighting defensively, in isolated pockets. We need to unite these sounds into something the Vraxians can't possibly adapt to." Jackson's eyes widened with sudden inspiration. "A global concert," he whispered. "All traditions playing simultaneously, not in harmony, but in beautiful chaos." General Campbell frowned. "The logistical challenges alone are considerable but not insurmountable," Melissa finished. "We've already established the global communication network for coordinating defense. We can use it to synchronize a worldwide performance." She pulled up her original acoustic research. "My resonance theory predicted this possibility, using Earth's ionosphere as a resonance chamber to amplify and project sound waves into space itself." Tyrone performed rapid calculations. "If we position acoustic amplifiers at key points along the magnetic field lines, we could create a planet-sized instrument." "You're talking about converting our entire planetary defense system into a musical instrument?" Campbell asked incredulously. "I'm talking about using every watt of remaining power to broadcast humanity's greatest creation, our music, as both weapon and message," Melissa corrected. "The Vraxians have been responding to our performances, not just fighting against them. What if we're not just disrupting their systems, but communicating with them on a level we don't yet understand?" An alert sounded as multiple screens showed Vraxian ships descending through the atmosphere in unprecedented numbers. "Whatever we're going to do, it needs to happen now," Maria warned. Melissa's gaze fell on a young violinist practicing in the corner, a child refugee whose family had been lost in the London attack. Despite everything, the girl played with raw emotion that brought tears to those who heard her. "That," Melissa said, pointing to the child, That is what we broadcast to the stars. Not just sound, but what makes us human. The global harmonic network stretched across what remained of human civilization, a desperate symphony of technology and art. Power plants diverted their final reserves as acoustic transmitters positioned at strategic points around the globe powered up simultaneously. The operation consumed 70% of Earth's remaining energy, a gamble of apocalyptic proportions. Synchronization at 98%, Tyrone reported from the Tokyo Control Center, where engineers monitored the worldwide grid of modified radio telescopes, concert halls, and stadium sound systems, now repurposed into what Melissa called the planet's voice box. Satellite imagery showed the Vraxian mothership descending through the upper atmosphere, its crystalline structure spanning nearly 20 kilometers across. Smaller vessels flanked it in perfect geometric formations. They're positioning directly above us, Maria observed. They know we're planning something. Melissa nodded, making final adjustments to the central control system. Jackson, are you receiving transmissions from all musical groups? Jackson sat surrounded by monitors, each showing different performances being coordinated across the globe. New Orleans jazz players, Tokyo taiko drummers, Mongolian throat singers, Andean flutists, Aboriginal didgeridoo masters, Celtic harpists, musicians from every surviving culture on Earth prepared to play simultaneously. All groups standing by, he confirmed, his fingers dancing across the mixing console. We've established the underlying harmonic foundation and programmed the phase shift algorithms to prevent destructive interference. General Campbell entered, his expression grim. The mothership is deploying what we believe to be their primary weapon. Seismic readings suggest it could potentially crack the planet's crust if fully discharged. Then we don't wait, Melissa decided. Commence global transmission. With the press of a button, the most ambitious concert in human history began. Across 6 continents, musicians played not a unified piece, but individual expressions of their cultural heritage, all captured and fed into the global harmonic network. The system processed these disparate sounds, not homogenizing them, but weaving them into a complex tapestry of human expression that rose through the ionosphere toward the Vraxian fleet. In Tokyo, they watched breathlessly as the first waves of acoustic energy reached the alien vessels. The smaller ships shuddered visibly, their perfect formations wavering as conflicting vibrations disrupted their harmonic fields. "It's working," Maria whispered. But the mothership continued its inexorable descent, apparently unaffected by the acoustic assault. A central aperture on its underside began to glow with accumulated energy, their planet-cracking weapon powering up. "They've adapted faster than we anticipated," Tyrone said, voice tight with fear. "The transmission isn't penetrating their primary shields." Melissa refused to accept defeat. "Jackson, implement Phase 2. Jackson nodded, opening a secure channel to every participating musician worldwide. "Now," he instructed simply. Across the planet, the music changed, not to a more powerful attack, but to questions. Musical phrases specifically designed based on Jackson's translations of Vraxian harmonic language, asking about their nature, their purpose, why they attacked. The mathematical precision of the aliens' own communication patterns interwoven with the emotional resonance only humans could create. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The mothership halted its descent, its weapon powering down as the vessel began to vibrate in complex patterns. "They're responding," Jackson said incredulously, transcribing the vibrations appearing on his monitors. "It's not an attack pattern. They're talking to us." The massive ship's vibrations translated through Melissa's equipment as a single, simple question that appeared on their main screen. "What is this feeling in your mathematics?" The control room fell silent as the implications washed over them. The Vraxians weren't just receiving their transmission, they were experiencing something entirely new to their species. They don't understand emotion, Melissa realized. They've never encountered it before. The mothership pulsed again, this time in a pattern that Jackson translated with widening eyes. "Teach us." The United Nations Harmonic Exchange Facility, hastily constructed in the ruins of Geneva, buzzed with activity as scientists and musicians worked alongside each other. 3 months had passed since the mothership's surprising request, and the uneasy truce that followed had given humanity precious time to rebuild. Melissa studied the vibration patterns emitting from the Vraxian delegation's crystalline communication devices, now placed at the center of what resembled both a scientific laboratory and a concert hall. "They're becoming more sophisticated," she observed, noting the subtle variations in the alien harmonics. "They're incorporating emotional undertones, mimicking our sadness frequency patterns." Jackson nodded, his fingers mapping the vibrations to musical notation. What had begun as simple mathematical exchanges had evolved into something approaching actual conversation, a new language being born between species. "It's still mechanical," he said. "They're replicating the patterns without experiencing the emotions themselves, like speaking words in a foreign language without understanding their meaning." The lead Vraxian representative, a crystalline entity they had nicknamed Echo, for its ability to perfectly replicate sound, shifted its form to better capture the string quartet's performance of Barber's Adagio for strings. "Explain grief," Echo requested afterward, its vibrations translated through Melissa's systems into approximations of human speech. "This pattern creates molecular instability within us, yet you willingly expose yourselves to it. How could one explain the beauty of sadness to a being that had evolved without emotions?" Melissa had struggled with this question since communication began. "Grief is the price we pay for connection," she tried explaining. "The music expresses the pain of losing something we value, someone we love. Love, connection, value. These concepts remain paradoxical." Echo responded, its vibrations betraying what Jackson had come to recognize as confusion. "Our hive operates on perfect efficiency. Units function or are replaced. No disruption occurs." Tyrone, who had been monitoring the quantum states of the Vraxian physiology, looked up from his instruments. "That's not entirely accurate," he said carefully. "Your neural networks are adapting. Exposure to human music is creating new pathways in your vibrational matrices." Echo's crystalline form shimmered, their equivalent of considering this information. "We are changing." In another section of the facility, Maria led a security team that remained vigilant. Not all humans embraced the exchange. A coalition of military leaders and grieving survivors called for immediate retaliation, while the aliens were vulnerable, not understanding. "The Brisbane protest has turned violent," she reported quietly to Melissa. "They're demanding we use our acoustic weapons offensively while we have the chance." Tokyo and Berlin are reporting similar unrest. Melissa understood their anger. Billions had died during the initial Vraxian attacks, entire cities reduced to dust by vibrational weapons. Her own sister had been in Chicago when it fell. "We need more time," she insisted. "What's happening here is unprecedented. They're beginning to understand us." General Campbell, now serving as military liaison to the exchange, joined them. The remaining Vraxian fleet is still in orbit, weapons powered down but not disabled. "Trust goes both ways, Doctor." Echo's vibrations shifted to a frequency they hadn't observed before. "Your kind is divided on whether to destroy us," it stated, not a question but an observation. "This creates disharmony in your collective." "Yes," Melissa admitted. "Many humans want revenge for those we lost." "Revenge," Echo repeated, the concept clearly foreign. "Another emotional response we do not possess." Jackson, who had been quietly observing, suddenly played a simple melody on the piano, a children's lullaby his mother had sung to him. Echo's form trembled, sections of its crystalline structure briefly taking on colors that had never before manifested in Vraxian physiology. "This pattern creates disruption," Echo said. "Vibrations uncharacteristically erratic, yet not unpleasant." "What is this?" Jackson smiled sadly. "That's nostalgia. Remembering something good that's gone." "We do not remember as you do," Echo responded. "We have perfect recall, but no attachment." That's what's changing, Melissa realized, excitement building as she reviewed Tyrone's physiological data. You're developing the capacity for emotional memory, the beginning of subjective experience. The implications were staggering. The Vraxians weren't just learning about human emotions, they were beginning to develop their own. The rebuilt Sydney Opera House gleamed in the morning sun, its iconic sails now incorporating crystalline elements that resonated with both human and Vraxian acoustics. 1 year after first contact, delegates from 17 surviving alien species gathered for what Earth's media had dubbed the Cosmic Symphony. Melissa stood at the edge of the harbor, taking a rare moment of solitude before the historic performance. Behind her, musicians from across the planet rehearsed alongside Vraxian resonators in a collaboration that would have been unimaginable during those first desperate days of combat. "Nervous?" Maria asked, joining her. The former military specialist now headed security for the Interstellar Harmonic Convention, though she still carried herself with a soldier's vigilance. "Terrified," Melissa admitted. "What if we're moving too quickly?" The past year had seen remarkable progress. Vraxian vibrational technology had revolutionized human medicine, sonic procedures that could repair damaged tissue without invasive surgery. Their precision engineering had helped rebuild cities and establish clean energy systems. In return, humanity had introduced them to the concept of emotional expression through art, a transformation that divided Vraxian society. "The protesters are keeping their distance," Maria reported, nodding toward the security perimeter, where a small but vocal group demonstrated against the alliance. Their signs displayed images of destroyed cities and the faces of those lost. Their grief remained raw, unhealed. Jackson approached, now serving as the chief translator between the species. His unique ability to understand and replicate both human music and Vraxian harmonics had made him invaluable to the ongoing exchange. "Echo is ready," he said. "The modifications to its resonance chamber are complete." Inside the opera house, thousands gathered, humans alongside representatives from distant worlds drawn by the unprecedented vibrational signatures now emanating from Earth. The Greleks with their photosonic perception, the harmonic hives of the Zentari, the bass-attuned Morbans, whose language consisted entirely of rhythmic vibrations. Tyrone waited backstage, monitoring the quantum harmonizer he'd developed based on Vraxian principles. "All systems calibrated," he confirmed, "though I still can't predict how Echo's new emotional centers will respond during the performance." Echo had evolved dramatically over the months of cultural exchange. Its once purely crystalline form now contained structures that more closely resembled organic neural pathways, physical manifestations of its developing capacity for emotional experience. "This piece we will perform," Echo said, its vibrations now containing subtle variances that conveyed something like anticipation. "It contains what you call joy. Joy, sorrow, hope, memory, all intertwined," Melissa explained. "That's what makes human music complex. Emotions don't exist in isolation." The house lights dimmed as Melissa took her position at the conductor's podium. The composition they would premiere had been written collaboratively, human emotional expression interwoven with Vraxian mathematical precision, creating something entirely new. As the music began, the audience experienced a sensory journey unlike anything in human history. Earth's instruments blended seamlessly with Vraxian resonance technology, creating harmonies that conveyed concepts beyond words in any language. In the climactic movement, Echo stepped forward for the duet with Melissa. The Vraxian began with perfect mathematical precision, each note exactly as written. But as Melissa's part introduced subtle emotional shifts, a mother's grief, a child's wonder, a lover's devotion, Echo's resonance changed. The crystalline being began to improvise, its patterns shifting into something neither human nor Vraxian, but beautifully new. Ripples of color flowed through its form as it expressed what could only be described as genuine emotion, not mimicry but authentic feeling. In the front row, a woman who had lost her entire family in the Chicago attack wept silently, her hand unconsciously reaching toward the alien performer. Beside her, a young Vraxian observer, part of their first generation exposed to human culture, vibrated in a pattern that mirrored her tears. As the final notes faded, Echo's form shimmered with an iridescent quality never before seen in its species. From its core emerged a harmonic pattern that, when translated, contained only 5 words. "Now we understand. We are sorry."